My cousin and her husband got married during the height of the pandemic. It's something they'd been planning for years, and when we went into lockdown, they decided to go ahead and officially tie the knot and just have their celebrations later. 2 years later, they had their second wedding day, and all their friends and family attended. The venue was about a 4-hour drive from where we lived and was practically in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking so far into nowhere that you could see all the stars in the sky like fireflies on a black canvas. I'm from the city, so light pollution was always something I had to contend with. Even on a clear day, you can't really see the stars. Not much, anyway. The day after their second wedding, a few of us had stayed for an extra night to catch up with family and go for a meal. We went to a local bar, and as I'm not much of a drinker, I offered to drive everyone back to their accommodation. My cousins and their parents were 10 minutes up the road, so I offered to take them first, as we were about a 20-minute drive away. I drove up this small, dark country road with hedges on both sides. This empty road eventually led to a small dirt path and took us to the lodges where they were all staying. We said our goodbyes, and I made my way back to get my family. On the drive back down the country lane, I saw a frog hopping across the road in front of me. I don't like to kill any living creatures, so I stopped the car and got out, leaving my door wide open. This frog just sat there in the middle of the road as if playing dead. I jumped, stomped, and clapped, trying to scare this frog out of the road. After a couple of minutes, the frog leaped off and went into the bushes. I walked back towards my car when I see a man coming right at me. I soon realized it was my own reflection in the car door window. I kinda laughed and shrugged it off, but this made me realize how vulnerable and out in the open I was. I hadn't even noticed my surroundings because of the headlights shining on me. The reality of it was, I was in the middle of nowhere, on an empty road, in the black of night. I mean, I've seen horror movies that start out this way. I jumped back into the car and locked the doors, took a deep breath and set off driving. In my own twisted little way, I realized that if this was some kind of horror movie, the killer's probably hiding in the back seat. I started to speed up as I was subdued to my own anxiety. I put my hand over my throat, thinking if someone was in the back and tried to strangle me or cut my throat, that my hand would in some way protect me. I knew it was all probably in my head, but I didn't want to put my hand in the back to find out the hard way that it wasn't my imagination. I drove as fast as I could back to the bar and parked up next to some woman having a smoke and ran in to see my family. I shared my story and they laughed at how ridiculous it was, and it was just me being paranoid.
Why wouldn't you just check? You watch too many videos on YouTube.
We collected our belongings and made our way back to the car just outside. As we were getting into the car, the smoking woman called out,
"Excuse me, your friend's just gone over there into the trees."
"What friend?"
"The one who was in the back of your car."
We all looked at each other in awe. We quickly checked the car, got in, and drove away. I don't think this person was out to hurt me, probably just after a free ride somewhere, but who knows what they might have done if I had kept driving on my own. I used to work security for a student halls of residence. I've submitted 1 or 2 stories here before, which you may or may not have heard. We had different duties and roles within our job description, depending on what we were assigned and whether we worked the day shift or the night shift. All of our sites, bar one, were manned, so we would have someone assigned as a night patrol officer. He or she would basically drive a large white van between all the sites, offering backup and patrolling the sites, ensuring there was nothing going on that shouldn't be, and that there were no health and safety issues. It was my job tonight to drive between the sites, making sure everything was okay, and responding to any calls and complaints. I started my 12-hour shift at 7 p.m. as usual, and would visit each residency 3 times throughout the night, and spend anywhere up to an hour at each one. This night was like any other night. The area we worked was near 2 large universities and several major colleges, so there was always students out partying and causing trouble. One of the areas where the students lived wasn't all that safe. A bit of a rundown neighborhood, you might say. There was a high amount of unemployment and crime in the area, but houses were cheap, so people bought them to rent out to students. Students would rent them usually without checking on the area first. They generally never stayed in the area for a second year. It got to about 3 in the morning, and this was usually where you would see people stumbling home drunk. The boys would be chanting and being rowdy, the girls usually screaming and giggling. As I drove down this one long road, 3 males ran out of nowhere right in front of me. They were so close I nearly hit one of them and had to slam on the brakes. I watched them run off into the housing and continued to drive while looking around to see what they were fleeing from. I couldn't see anything, so continued to drive on when I got this strange feeling that something wasn't right. Something told me to go back and check. This wasn't even my responsibility, but my curiosity and instinct got the better of me. I drove back to where the 3 men had come running from, to find a young girl laying on the floor in hysterics, crying. I didn't see her from the road, as she was behind some trees. She was easier to spot coming up from the other side. She had a sparkly red dress on and was coming home from a night on the town, or maybe even a party. She was vulnerable, and I had no idea what had happened to her, but something had happened to her. I tried to introduce myself to her and let her know she was safe. I offered my driver's license to her and told her I was going to call the police and that I'd wait with her until they arrived. She didn't say a word to me, so I just reassured her she was safe, and I sat with her while she just laid there and continued to cry. It's a difficult situation to be in for a man. I wanted to try and get her to safety, even if it was just to sit in the van until the police came. I'm not sure I could take on these 3 men if they came back. But then, what if she screams while I try to help her? Others might think I'm the attacker, or that I'm trying to kidnap her and come to her aid. I think I would rather get beat up than accused of attempted kidnapping or whatever, so I just sat there, reassuring her that help was on the way. Eventually, the police came, and after talking with her, they put her in the police car and took her away. I gave the best description I could, but I didn't see much as it all happened so fast. I don't know what the intentions of these men were. Were they robbing her? Were they about to do something worse? Did they do something worse? I'm not really sure, but I'm confident that the sound of the van I was driving disturbed them. I'm glad I followed the instinct I felt, telling me to go back and check. As sad as it was that it happened, for me to be in the right place at the right time, I'm certain that something was looking out for her. The story I'm about to tell you happened to me about 7 years ago. Me, my girlfriend, and nephew were going to a rock concert to see one of our favorite bands. The nearest concert to us was about an hour's drive away, when there's no other cars on the road. When we arrived at the venue, there was a huge parking lot just outside that already looked to be full. We drove around the parking lot for about half an hour, looking for a space, but with no luck. Just as we were pulling out to check for any other lots, I saw another car pulling out of a space to our right. I was able to get a tight swing on the car and pulled in the row to drive down as quickly as I could. I saw a man running across the car park, and just as I was backing into the space, this man, probably in his early 20s, ran into the space.
Hey, do you mind? I'm trying to back in. Fuck off. We've been looking for a space for an hour. My friends are driving around now, and unless you want to fight for it, I suggest you leave now.
I'm not usually one to back down from a confrontation, but he waved over to a car with 3 other guys in it. I was raised to stand up for myself, and it wouldn't be the first time I took a beating, but I'm not going to get my ass whooped in front of my girlfriend and nephew for the sake of my ego. I started to drive away, but my stupid ass had to get the last word in as I drove away.
Sure thing, pal. I just hope your car doesn't get f***ed up while you're inside enjoying the concert.
I put my foot down and sped out of the parking lot, watching him jump up and shout in my rearview mirror. We found somewhere else local to park and went and enjoyed the show. I had no intention of doing anything to their car, but still, I knew it would be on their mind throughout the night, so probably wouldn't enjoy the concert as much. We watched the show and walked back to our car and set off on our journey home. Like any event where thousands of people are released onto the streets at the same time, there were tailbacks as far as the eye can see. After about an hour of slow crawling traffic, our sat-nav diverts us through a small housing estate and onto a backcountry road. A few other cars followed and turned off at various crossroads. There was one car that continued to follow us at every turn. I learned this trick if you suspect someone is following you. Either take 4 lefts or 4 rights depending on where you are. If they take the same turns, then they are definitely following you. Turns out this car was definitely following us. I started to speed up, and so did the car following us. They knew we were onto them, and they started to drive erratically, swerving from left to right. They crashed into the back of our car, causing us to spin off the road. We were all okay, and no one was hurt. I heard a voice shout,
"Get out of the car and fight me like a man, and we'll leave your bitch alone."
It was the same guys from the concert. They followed us all the way out into the middle of nowhere to start a fight. My girlfriend begged me not to get out of the car, but what choice did I have? My nephew was crying, and regardless of what I did next, we were in trouble. I told my girlfriend and nephew to stay put, and I got out of the car and walked out into the middle of the road. I stood tall, looking at the man I shouted at back in the parking lot.
"Think you're a big man, do ya?"
I don't want to go into too much detail, but I'm sure you can guess what happened. I got my ass kicked. Thankfully, they kept their promise and left my girlfriend and nephew out of it. My girlfriend had managed to get the license plate of the car and take some footage of the beating. It was reported to the police, and all 3 were arrested. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing.